Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael Brendan Dougherty. I'm politics editor at Business Insider, and I'm here today with Daniel Strauss. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Daniel Strauss. I'm a reporter for the Hill newspaper and a blogger for the Hill's blog Briefing Room.
And we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the races and in politics. And so, yesterday, John Huntsman came out and gave this new speech that he's kind of debuting on the trail about trust, and he refers to himself as a consistent conservative in some new web videos. And a lot of commentary from George Will to Eric Erickson and others are saying, oh, gee, maybe Huntsman is kind of a conservative, which was my position going back to this summer. And I was wondering what you thought of that and how I think you've been watching the Huntsman campaign pretty closely. You know, most people don't dispute that he seemed to be positioning himself as a moderate early on. Do you think that was the case?
Well, here's the thing. I actually, Michael, I think you were the first. Your article in the American Conservative was the first one I saw that was really making this case. So, kudos on that. But yeah, I do think on the surface, or certainly temperamentally, in this election cycle, he seems more moderate in the sense that the GOP and the conservative base wants someone who is very much the antithesis of President Obama in temperament, which is that, someone who's not looking for agreement and is not calm, but is ready to actually, get physical and really, fight, which is certainly, I think, what the definition of the shallow definition of a conservative is. So in that sense, I guess he's been, modeling himself as a moderate. But when you go down and look at the positions on a host of issues, he really doesn't look very liberal. I mean, from tax policy to, abortion, these are pretty conservative stances. But my problem in general with the entire question of this is that the idea that like a perfect conservative or a perfect liberal could possibly win an election and become president is pretty remote to me. I mean, Even look at Obama on foreign policy. He definitely isn't doing exactly what the most staunch liberals do. He's pretty much appeased conservatives and neocons on, foreign policy and drone strikes and not closing Guantanamo. So the question I think with Huntsman is really, when people ask that, I really don't think they're asking policy-wise, is he a conservative? I think they're asking, why is he so calm? What do you think?
I think that's right in a way. I think so. Like, to give a quick recap of the recent history of the right, I think. I was involved at the American Conservative, where I wrote that article, which was known as an anti-war conservative magazine through the last decade. And that was a big divide among conservatives. Or actually, it was actually a small divide, really. We were in the smaller end of it. And at least sitting from my perch there, I realized that the conservative movement was starting to define itself by this slashing ideological style, right? We had our little orthodoxies about war, too. I don't want to say that we didn't, but the right seemed to take on this almost sectarian hothouse quality to it that demanded partisanship as well as policy substance. And and I think a lot of people just assume that the styles overtake in substance in a lot of ways. And I think that's why people were able to miss that Huntsman is a conservative, is that, well, he's not fire-breathing, he's not, he's not trying to polarize divisions in American society. or in our culture. So how is he conservative at all? And a lot of conservatives take that style as the only indicator of fidelity to their policy ideas. So he can be a troubling figure in that way. And I think that's sad in a way because the whole, in the macro scale, conservatism with a small c, going back to, Burke in his time and place, or Russell Kirk, was all about this like thoughtful, reflective, non-dogmatic style and approach to politics, culture, and art. And now it seems much more like sectarian Marxism in a way, of like where it's constantly looking for deviationists and people that are insufficiently committed to the cause. So I don't know. It's a troubling inversion, and Huntsman's candidacy kind of dances along a knife's edge of it right now.
I think the other problem, though, I mean, I think, though, it's important actually to sort of at least consider, if you're running for president, how you're going to look if you're trying to run as a conservative or a liberal. I mean, my explanation for why Huntsman hasn't been able to really catch fire in the polls or something was really actually more of a marketing thing. I expected him to jump into the race and say, I was ambassador to China for the Obama administration. I know the secrets. I know what's really going on in the Obama administration. Elect me, pay attention to me, and we're going to find out a whole bunch of other things that you won't even believe, and I'm going to change it all. But he didn't want to do that. He never used being sort of an insider to the Obama administration against him, which was always, that always really confused me. It was never really the policy. And, like you say, it is strange because Gingrich, who's modeling himself as the strongest real conservative candidate, there's plenty on him that doesn't sound conservative at all.
Right. Right. Well, he used to brag about being a Rockefeller Republican or a conservative futurist and things like that. I agree with you on your point about Huntsman, that he didn't come out of his ambassadorship and act like a whistleblower, which I think would have been the persona that the conservative movement would have liked to have heard. And I think also it could potentially appeal to moderates and even liberals who felt that their hopes were not being met in the Obama administration. So successful campaigns seem to me a mix of like the man and the mission and the moment. And I think Huntsman just yesterday with this new speech about trust has figured out, what someone like him, a moderate seeming but also conservative in policy substance guy, can say about the current presidency. And it sounds credible, right? So I feel like successful campaigns are like successful rock groups, right? So you couldn't imagine, say, like, I don't think you could give Coldplay a Red Hot Chili Peppers songbook and have them be a smashing success, even though the songs are hits in themselves. So I feel like it's very important for a candidate to find their genre or their key, and it has to match up with their persona, their biography, and then the mood of the country. I think Huntsman's just settled on something that fits his persona, and it's a question of whether there's still time for him to strike a chord with the mood of the party, and I'm not sure that there is. Maybe.
So I was at that speech yesterday. Could you elaborate a little bit more about the chord he struck on? Because I mean, with both speeches this week, President Obama made his new nationalism speech also. I just was sort of, I didn't get that there was actually really very much there for either Obama's or Huntsman's speech. I mean, there were these proposals on, restoring trust in the government, but for me, and we're going to talk about the nationalism speech later, I just didn't really sense that there was much new or different. What was the chord that he struck?
I think he finally struck. I think that that word trust is the note. I don't think it came off in the National Press Club because I don't think it's that audience works.
Yes.
It's a cynical audience. But I think it maybe threads the needle where, we had all this hype about hope in 2008, and it seems like we haven't had delivery of that. And so Huntsman's case is that, well, instead we've had crony capitalism, we've had connected lobbyists, we've had bailouts of Wall Street, and we've had a reform of Wall Street that looks like it's setting us up for another too big to fail disaster in the future. And so he's kind of saying what we need at the basic level is trust. Someone who doesn't make a messianic promise and then fails to deliver, but someone who just says what he believes, has a record of backing it up, and that's it. And then it's a conservative record behind it. I think that's a message that Huntsman is capable of delivering. I don't think he's capable of delivering a message that, say, Newt Gingrich is trying to deliver, which is, I'm going to transform everything. We're going to unleash the power of my brain on the government, and everything is going to be more efficient and better run and bring us into this glorious future. That would sound ridiculous from Huntsman. From Gingrich, obviously, it's starting to sound credible to some people, even if it's not credible to me.
Well, I got to tell you, Michael, if Gingrich was elected president, I would expect a lot of change. I don't know what, I don't know how popular all that change would be, but there would be a lot of change. So
maybe. I actually think Gingrich is perpetually in this state where he's going to undermine his mission with his mouth. And, he got, obviously working with President Clinton, the Republican Congress got a few major landmark things done. They were also doing that under a period where we were experiencing a peace dividend. We did cut military budgets. More of the economy was freed up from that, and the internet boom came along. So, I don't know how much you can attribute just to their individual efforts, but the Republican Revolution in contract with America fizzled, very quickly, and his popularity went down to the low 20s and never got out of there. So I think, unless we've made the presidency so powerful now that he could do whatever he wants and Congress be damned, I actually think he'd be mired within a year of being elected. But that's maybe another topic.
Yeah, I think so. I do want to touch on that, though. I think if there's ever anything that's going to create a sort of liberal Tea Party, it's going to be a Newt Gingrich presidency, actually. Because the resistance on the left to him I think would just be so rabid. And it requires just a small minority in either chamber to obstruct anything that, together, that's basically what, really allowed the Tea Party to thrive and, the GOP to regain some influence after 2008, I think. It was this tiny group that was so disciplined and so motivated. I really don't see that being any different if, in the next, Gingrich is sworn into office and, he starts to go out with anything. I want to go back to Huntsman for a second, though.
Sure.
So it sounds like we're in agreement on that this is not, he's definitely on a host of issues not moderate, not a rhino. But, and as I said, you can't be a strong presidential candidate and perfectly pass the litmus test. But at this point, when he, releases a financial reform plan that includes capping the big banks, don't you think that sort of hurts him a little bit because it sort of perpetuates the unwanted perception, which is that, he's, just trying to appeal to liberals and independents here?
I don't think so because he's pitched it in a way to appeal to conservatives. I mean, he just talks about it's ending too big to fail. It's ending the bailout culture, and the bailouts really were what got the Tea Party motivated, especially when Detroit was bailed out. So I think that's a good move, but that's the only part where he's begun to unsettle the conservative intellectuals that are looking at him now, is because they're asking, well, they're saying, I like the idea of no longer bailing out financial institutions, but I'm not sure about government deciding who's too big and who isn't.
Right.
And I do agree that that's a problem, but I think, Huntsman, his tax proposals of getting rid of subsidies and different tax breaks and special carve-outs, and then adding this on. I mean, what he's really pitching is sort of like a conservative fair deal.
Right.
A government that's much more transparent, a financial system that's more transparent and simpler. And that has a lot of appeal on the right if you can get it out there. The only thing is, like we said, his style is not, hasn't been reaching yet. So even though those feel like a kind of what Timothy Carney calls free market populism, even though this feels like free market populist stances, he still kind of has this patrician style that, I don't know, seems to not be catching on.
This is, I mean, we're hitting at this again and again here, but this is, I think, this is how I think you can sort of track, or maybe this will be the hindsight explanation of why each candidate that had their caught fire moment in the primary caught on and they didn't. I would never say that Romney is a particularly charismatic guy, and I don't think Huntsman is someone who immediately gets you standing. It's, his substance that has appealed to his fans. But with Herman Cain, with Bachman, with Gingrich, and with Perry, these are sort of cultish figures whose swagger, whose sort of style has really sort of been a big part of their pitch and been a big part of their early attraction. And then they flame out quickly. I don't, with both Romney and Huntsman, and it has nothing to do with anything else, I think. They just are they're a little straighter, and I think what the GOP base wants, again, is someone who's going to inspire them, someone who's going to do, have that sort of transformational election like Obama did in 2008.
Right. No, and style is important, I think, in politics. I think it always has been, and it's like an underrated part of even governing, I think. Margaret Thatcher had a style that helped her enact the policy she wanted to enact, and that helped her withstand the amazing backlash and criticism they inspired. And the same thing with Ronald Reagan. He had the Gipper style that helped him too. So I think style is important in an executive leader, both in the private and the public sphere. But that's also, of course, why I actually prefer Romney or Huntsman to a Gingrich, because, as David Brooks pointed out, Gingrich has all of the style of the 1960s, like a right-wing version of the 1960s. He's petulant, self-expressive, individualistic, turns everything into a kind of revolutionary showdown. I prefer, personally, I prefer politicians, even to some degree like Obama or Dwight Eisenhower, who you could accuse of being like a golfer in chief.
Right.
So,
I mean, definitely since Obama's been in office, he's been, I think, a little more straight in the same way we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something, though. I know you had a recent blogging heads and you talked about Gingrich a little bit here, but like my skepticism for Gingrich is really that this is a guy. I mean, he says he helped balance the budget, but I just see his biggest vulnerability being the DNC saying, "Hey, remember this is the original obstructionist. This was the guy who literally shut down the government." And that polls worse than anything else right now, even worse than Congress. It's obstruction, it's gridlock, it's the nightmare of August with the deficit agreement. And I just don't see Gingrich recovering from that if the Democrats, and if someone wants to screw it up, I'm sure the Dems will, you know, recovering from that in a general election. What do you think?
I don't know if it's a big weakness. I think it is. I think the polling shows it is. I personally don't feel it. I know a lot of other ideological conservatives don't feel that way, and we're worried. My feeling on Gingrich is it's just death by 1,000 gaffes. Is that it's you turn off 5% of voters with your personal life. You turn off another 5% of voters with your style. You turn off another 5% of voters with your record. You turn off another 5% of voters with a particularly stupid thing you said. Like, it just seems to go on, and I feel like by next November, if he survived the nominating process and became the nominee, I just feel like by the time August or September came around, it would just be so obvious
Right.
that he has a ceiling that he will continue to lower on himself, just as he did as Speaker. So I fundamentally believe, I'll put this out there as a prediction, if Newt Gingrich is the nominee, I think Obama can win a 40-state landslide. I mean, I think it could be
That's a bold prediction, Michael.
Yeah, and I think he could do that even if unemployment ticks up a little bit. I think that's how repulsive Newt will make himself. I mean, I just don't think anyone can go broke underestimating, overestimating how self-destructive Newt Gingrich is. But
right. So I guess I think I want to, before we get into actually what we're disagreeing on Huntsman, I want to ask you, because there's still been murmurings again about two things. Jonathan Chait has written at least one blog post, I think more than one recently, on Huntsman really setting himself up for 2016, and then Huntsman possibly having a contingency plan for running as an independent. He's repeatedly struck down the prospect of running as an independent, and it seems like something that just sort of like a weed idea that comes up from DC and doesn't go away for a little while.
I don't think he would run as an independent, and Christine Todd Whitman has suggested he should. I mean, the only way I could see it is if there's something unstable about it, unless there is a hatred for Mitt Romney in John Huntsman that makes him unstable and makes him want to torpedo a Romney election. But I don't think that's even a real possibility. And I don't think Ron Paul's going to run as an independent either. I don't think. I think the price post Ralph Nader, I think we're going to be living in a generation where people are terrified of doing what Nader did to Al Gore, because it just ruins you with your ideological allies, and it ruins you with your party forever. You have no career after that, and so I don't see that. As far as Jonathan Chait's 2016 scenario, I don't see that either. I mean, people were putting together different pieces of that puzzle, saying, oh, well, when he left to go to China, he was saying that his party had become too strident and shrill.
Right.
And then some other things. And, so the thinking was, the Republicans will go through a tantrum in 2012. They'll lose. They'll come to their senses. and nominate someone more moderate in 2016. I do not think that is the case at all. Unless by an accident of the nominating process, Ron Paul is the nominee, I don't think it'll be read that way by history. And
Right.
I do think John Huntsman is trying to win now because the president is beatable.
Right.
And my feeling is that the nominee is not going to be Gingrich. I think it's going to be Romney or Huntsman. I think Huntsman does have a shot.
You do?
Yeah, I
Even
do
now?
think. Yeah, even now, my position is that at this time last time around, Rudy Giuliani was leading in the polls. Before that, at this time, Howard Dean was leading in the polls. Things can change dramatically in the last month, as John McCain proved. So I don't think you're going to get a tantrum nominee in 2012. I think you're more likely to see in 2016, if Republicans lose this time, you're more likely to see a more conservative candidate then, which is
Really?
that, yeah, that's I have the exact opposite opinion of Chait on this, which is that in 2016 they'll say, no, we really need to nominate an actual conservative this time. And I think that could hurt Chris Christie or others that make,
A lot of noise.
yeah, but don't deliver a lot of results. I mean, personally, I think by 2016, because of the financial crisis we've had, I think a lot of Democrats are going to have reputations as government cutters and deficit cutters too. So, look at Cuomo or some of the other major Democratic governors.
I mean,
think
certainly, Cuomo's going to be that candidate who's been campaigning for 6 years, I think.
Yeah, but just by the function of the fact that so many states have balanced budget amendments, and there are going to be tons of Democratic governors with government cutting credentials by then. So I mean, we'll see. I mean, that's looking kind of far out.
Yeah, I'm personally really skeptical about making really broad predictions like that. I remember in January I was talking to a Hill staffer for a Republican congressman, and she said, I asked her what's going to happen in 2012, and she immediately said, we're actually looking forward to 2016. So,
Wow.
And that was 10 months ago or something.
Yeah. I think a lot of Republicans felt that way 10 months ago, but I feel like Republicans they can't decide whether 2012 is an opportunity or whether it's sort of like a test run. So, and then they keep going back and forth. I think now a lot of them believe it's an opportunity that they might squander, but if the unemployment rate gets below 8%, I think Obama's going to have a very strong case for re-election. But
I would believe that, contingent on who the nominee is on the right.
Yeah. Now, I think we should actually skip. We're going to talk a little bit about Huntsman and climate change, but I think we should just get right into Obama because.
Oh, you didn't want to? Okay, you want to talk about Obama?
I think people are getting sick of me talking about John Huntsman.
So Obama did this new nationalism speech this week in Kansas, and he really drew on Teddy Roosevelt in arguing that, the federal. And Roosevelt made this speech in the early 1900s and said, it's the job of the federal government to make sure everybody has a fair chance. We can't leave it up to the market to let everything go. And Obama sort of drew on that and saying, we need to help the middle class here. Like Huntsman's speech, I really don't think he said very much that was new. I thought he was a little more pugnacious, like Huntsman, in this speech. But overall, it was sort of the usual inspiring Obama speech to me. Not really much of a game changer. But you had some thoughts and you had some problems with the speech, right?
It's interesting. I thought it was a better speech than you did in that I think Um, I do think liberals want to have a liberalism, again, that has a bigger unifying cause, and making the middle class your cause is, I think, a winner rhetorically. Because I think a lot of people feel like the liberalism has split off into like sort of interest group politics. Like there's an environmentalist over here, there's the feminists over here, there's unions over here. And so I think it's inspiring whenever I hear a liberal talking about the middle class. So, I thought that was good. My problem with the speech is I actually wonder if that vision of a more egalitarian America, wealth-wise, is even possible for the state to create or encourage anymore. I wonder if we're entering a new era of. I wonder if that was like an artifact of 20th century civilization, where you've had the Industrial Revolution, and now you're distributing its gains more evenly. And the Industrial Revolution itself helps you do that because factories tended to stay put for decades. And that meant that you could employ people in the same job for decades.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering now if even factories and production, the factors of production, are now so mobile that you can't guarantee that. Except, maybe you could have a class of state employees or state pensioners, the military, the bureaucracy, that is a middle class, but that's certainly not big enough for a country of 300 million people, for the public sector to support that middle class directly. So, I'm not saying I welcome this age of inequality that I think is coming upon us, but I'm really skeptical that the state and society can create this on their own anymore. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would be worried about, or that's, I guess, my problem with the speech, is that I felt very unconvinced that this was possible. I felt like Obama was asking us to wish and to dream for it to be possible, but I didn't feel like there was a vision again that made sense. And the other thing is, we've gone through this transition where we say we're going to make more people middle class by getting them educated or getting them home ownership. And that's turning out to be a disaster. And not only is it a disaster, but it also makes people that go through 4 years of post-secondary education or more actually don't want to work in a factory or work in the kinds of jobs that, were secure for decades and had a good pension at the end in a private sector.
Right.
They tend to want to move around. They tend to want a career that keeps them mobile.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
If he had talked more specifically about like reindustrialization and building industry in this country and then keeping it here through tariffs and everything else, then I might have been actually more responsive to it, because maybe that is a policy course that could create or recreate some of that America again. But I'm not.
Right.
I'm not convinced Obama's there.
Right. So I saw. I think that was the same takeaway I had from the speech, that it was pretty vague. But my explanation for that was that he wasn't really even trying to propose an actual vision. He's done that, and that didn't really work out. He's trying to get some momentum and energize his side of the political spectrum and get them pushing for, to do whatever it needs to happen to get Cordry confirmed as a new head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and, passing this taxpayer payroll tax cut extension. I just didn't see there wasn't really much of an explanation there. And I think also you're right. but the problem that Obama has, or anyone would have in sort of that vision, is that the American dream isn't what it was. It seems to me now that the American dream is to be rich instead of to be comfortably middle class, to have a home out in the suburbs, to own a car, to have a dog, and send your kids to a good public school.
Right, I agree. I agree. And I think there's also a social element, too, which is that I do think one thing that I think Rick Santorum is right on, and it's weird for me to say those words, is that I do think that there is a social and cultural element to this, which is that I think for a growing number of people, at least in the city I'm in now, they don't want to move up to Westchester suburbs and have 2.5 kids and a dog and a house. And they imagine their lives as lives that might include marriage, but then might include divorce and remarriage. I think the middle and the working classes, as divorce has become more widespread, that dissipates their capital over time in a very literal way, in that it's more expensive to maintain two separate households for a family in divorce than it is to maintain one. So even that element of the dream seems more unattainable, because there's, there was a dark side to that, obviously. There were, housewives that were beaten, children beaten, whatever, but there was also, a set of stigmas that helped keep families together that way and to help them build that economic capital. And I don't think that's there anymore either. So,
right. Well, this is, I think both Santorum and Obama have a problem here from different angles. They don't.
Right.
There's no real. I don't think it's easy to define what the middle class should look like. Every legislator wants the middle class to be bigger and healthier, I think, and they want the wealthy to be sort of this honest, sort of entrepreneurial, mythical sort of American businessman who, takes care of his workers and has some sort of economic moral code. But it's really unclear now on all those fronts. To just draw from personal experience, I graduated from college about a year ago, and every college relationship I can think of, except for a small, less than a handful, they've broken up. And these, I think, are relationships that a decade ago, or a generation ago, would have ended up in marriage and 2.5 kids. But now the norm is different. The norm is you don't marry your college girlfriend or boyfriend. You go out into the world.
It's funny. That's might explain ideological differences. I married a high school sweetheart.
Hey, no, I'm an old guy. I'm an old soul in this way too. That was actually my dream. So
it's a worthy dream.
I know. I'm a big fan.
But no, I think you're right, and I've met so many people who the Ozzie and Harriet, the Mad Men style in Tarrytown, commuting on a train,
right,
and then come home at night. That has no romantic appeal to them. It has no.
Which is really strange, by the way, because it has an incredibly huge amount of appeal to it just sounds pleasant to me.
Yeah, in some ways, obviously I can overdraw this, because in some ways, Occupy Wall Street was a movement showing that young people want to join the system, they want a job. These are people that want jobs. These are people that want to go to work someday. But I don't think for a lot of people, and a lot of young people, even the ones that want jobs, it involves that kind of stability of lifelong marriage, life in suburbia. I don't think it includes that at all.
Right.
No one, in a way, you used to have these expressions of loyalty to corporations that took care of you for 40 years, and then the corporations would have some sort of loyalty to you back, give you a great pension, throw you a great party when you leave. And now no one believes corporations will give you that loyalty, and so then they almost never give. I don't think any of us are prepared to give a particular corporation or company that kind of loyalty.
Right. I mean, partially because I think the villainization of corporations. But yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so that element of social trust is gone too. So
right.
So I don't know. I don't know. You know, I'm willing to believe that we're entering into a more unpleasant age in which you know, there is a small, or maybe not so small, nearly aristocratic class of elites that pass on the skills and the privileges to maintain their elite status, and that the middle class essentially divides. There's some that escape up into this elite class, and then the rest fall down into greater economic insecurity and instability.
So it sounds like then that this speech, I mean, like you said, the problem with this speech was that, for me, going off what you said, the real problem with Obama's speech is that his goals were so small and short term. It was, again, extending the payroll tax cut.
Oh, yeah.
Confirming Cordry, maybe one or two other things, but I don't think even he thinks that he could get another stimulus or do any of the things that in his wildest dreams he would want to do.
I wonder if in some ways that you just struck a thought with me, though, which is interesting. I wonder if the ideological unity of the parties, right, where we used to live in a world where there were these sectional divides that allowed there to be liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats, and conservative Republicans, liberal Democrats. And I feel like that is a more hospitable environment for a president like Teddy Roosevelt to, or even like Franklin Roosevelt, to set forth a vision for what American society and government should be like, and have it get enough political appeal to pass and to make these big transformative changes. Mm-hmm. But now I feel like with the ideological sorting of the parties, it's almost impossible to make that appeal, because you're going to be met with really hostile resistance from at least 30 to 50% of the political spectrum. So you can't come up with these kind of creative, the New Deal or the Square Deal or even the ownership society or something like that, something that can kind of sweep or transcend our partisan differences.
Right.
Maybe it's not even possible, and America maybe is poorer for it.
So, I mean, I guess it's pretty grim, Michael, but it doesn't sound like there's anything that really can be done. I mean, it's just whoever wins the blame game now, which has sort of been the pattern lately, No one
wins a decisive election, right? So we have a Republican Revolution in '94, and then within a few years that's mute. We have a Bush surge by 2000, 2002, and it's reversed in 4 years, and it feels like then 4 years later, the Democratic Revolution of 2006 is put back in its place. That might be the new normal for some time to come.
Well, that's pretty unfortunate.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, but on the other hand, maybe we're wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe the economic downturn we're experiencing now is a temporary phase. Maybe the 90s and early 2000s, minus the war on terror, is sort of the mean that America's entering into. And, in an era with that much contentment as there was in the 90s, politics will be so much smaller. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know.
It is a little hard to, I don't know. I don't, but I think there's definitely something to be said for wondering what's going to happen to the middle class as each party works harder to come off, or most Americans, as each party comes off, works harder to appeal to them, rather than a more abstract goal like pushing a vision. I just don't get the sense that either Republicans or Democrats are really pushing some grand idea. Like, do you remember the new foundation, Obama's new foundation?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was, yeah, well, okay. But I was hoping he would say no. But that disappeared pretty quickly. And I think that the real worrisome thing is that there's no room right now for a grand vision. It's just,
Right.
small points and small victories so you can win in the polls tomorrow. It's basically, it's pretty similar to sort of the plague of the media right now, which is that we're so focused on today's narrative, winning the morning, that stuff, that the longer term, more effective, more groundbreaking journalism doesn't exist, isn't as ubiquitous as it was.
Yeah, no, it's hard. I mean, the other thing though, and this is something, what I was saying before about a politics that's defined by very small differences and very small, tiny incremental change. History does have a way of interrupting that, and
Yeah.
I mean, we did see that on 9/11, that we're suddenly hit with a decade of politics about civil liberties, warfare, foreign policy that no one was expecting. So, um, maybe, the current policy system that we're in fails the middle class so badly that we have both parties scrambling for a big vision within the next decade. I don't know.
I would hope for that. I want to. We're coming up almost an hour, and I really actually do want to hit the cultural topic that we were talking
Yeah.
about. So for a long time, I was a big Chicago file, and I'm from Chicago. I grew up there, and I loved it to death. And I always sort of explained a sort of unnatural animosity from myself and my friends toward New York as sort of a penis envy and a jealousy, because while New York has a lot more than Chicago does, we still have a great deal to offer, and it felt for a long time that New York was literally and figuratively overshadowing it.
Yeah.
And now I live in D.C., and it's different. I used to go up to New York a lot more than I have recently, but I did recently, and I have to admit, like, you do get the sense that there is a lot to do in New York, but realistically, what I do and what my friends do, go out to drink, go out to a party, hang around with friends, movies, those sort of things, are not exclusive to New York. I mean, Broadway, I think, is, but even there are Broadway shows here. So I don't really, I mean, my question to you, and you live in New York and I live in D.C., is like, is there life outside of New York?
There is, it's funny. I was in D.C. for a couple of years, or outside in its suburbs, and I'm in the
Right.
New York suburbs now in Westchester, and I work in the city. Um, I remember in 2009, I wanted to get out of the D.C. metro area very badly and get back closer to New York. And for me, it was largely that I felt like DC was such a one industry town, which is that the industry is government, or reporting on government, or advising government, or lobbying government. And that was everyone's topic of conversation constantly. And I just preferred. New York is very parochial in a way that, like, few other cities are. The famous New Yorker cover where, the avenues of New York loom very large in our imagination, and then there's like Jersey, then the
Right.
Heartland, and California, and it disappears altogether. New York has that parochialism, but I can walk downstairs in the building I'm in. The Business Insider's here on the 13th floor. a few floors below, there's a talent agency. A few floors below that's like a physical therapy center, and I can walk just down to the street, and someone will have no idea what it is I do, no idea what I care about, no idea what I think, will not be able to categorize me, and I like that. I like that freedom, and I like that New York has an entrepreneurial culture, a startup tech culture, a Wall Street culture, an immigrant culture. It feels like a city of the world, and for a paleoconservative like me to get into that kind of rhetoric might be a little weird.
Yeah, that something has to be said.
But I like that. I mean, I like. I just felt like DC was so. Everyone was involved in the one game. And then, and that could be fun. That was really fun when I was 25 years old.
Right.
So it's like, oh, I'm going to go to an Old Crow Medicine Show concert, and I'll run into Eve Fairbanks from the New Republic, who, I love her work, and I can't wait to talk to her about it.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like, I don't know, I'm 29. I'd rather run into someone. And I love Eve, and I would love to run into her someday again, too. But, now I'd like to run into someone who does something completely different from what I do.
Right.
And, actually have a human experience that isn't so narcissistic. I mean, do you feel like, you've come to D.C., young journalist, interested in politics. Do you find it intoxicating, or do you find it, do you sense that the hangover is already coming?
Well, two things on this. I mean, for a very, very long time, I dreamed about doing this and breaking into that sort of young DC journalist community, which I haven't. But it is really nice to be able to go out to a party or meet some people who you've heard about or sort of know about, and within 5 or 10 minutes, you'll be talking about something that you both are really interested in and know a lot about and are passionate about. So I think, I've been told that everybody needs to live in New York for a while, and I do believe that. And I spent a summer there, but I never spent any longer. And I think actually, if you're interested in any of the things that govern DC, so politics and policy, you do need to spend some time here, not only because, it's how you cut your teeth, but also because you're never going to meet as many people or as tightly knit a community that are interested in the same things as you are here. And there aren't going to be as many, inside jokes you'll be able to say,
oh, yeah.
Did you see what was in, not even Playbook, a different morning newsletter, or did you hear what happened here? Or did you see what happened to Mark Halperin? And you will be able to pick up on those jokes. But I think my gripe has always been with a lot of things that the importance in life is balance. And that's the appeal of New York, which is that it does have a strong political community, which is different than DC. But, for someone like me who wants to come home and I don't want to talk about politics. I don't want to think about it. I want to think about,
the White Sox.
The White Sox, exactly. Although I'm less with it's Michigan football right now, which I'm going to get you into, Michael. It's coming.
Okay.
Just fair warning. New York is probably better. I'm just a little wary about New York in general because most people I talk to burn out on it pretty quickly within 5 or 6 years, and it's just the grind of, I guess, having everything there. I mean, there's that joke about the kids who grew up in New York don't like anything, and
right.
I'm wondering if that's true. I mean,
no, it's so true. It's true. It's horrible. It's why I've never actually lived in the city. Is that?
And you went to Bard, so you went to college just outside the city, right?
Right, yeah, kind of. And the thing I found is, with my friends that moved to the city, So if you live in Spanish Harlem, right, which is still maybe some parts of it affordable for people like us, and then you have friends that live in West Chelsea or something like that, you will see each other so much less than you would anticipate if you're coming from DC.
Right.
Because people literally, I think really people are stressed out by the density of people. So if it's not happening in a 5-block radius, it feels like such a pain in the ass to get there. You know, and God forbid it's happening in a different borough. You know, you'll never get someone to leave Brooklyn to come to Manhattan if they didn't already have another reason to do so. So that is sickening and frightening, and I think New York real estate is also a dehumanizing experience for most people. And so I take comfort. I'm very closely knit with friends from high school because I married my high school sweetheart. And I grew up in the suburbs, so I still see friends and can do that. But if I was thrown alone in the city, I would get burnt out on it after 5 years or so. Totally. And I want to say something for DC, though. Like, for people that want to get into this, like, culture of young DC, it is intoxicating and fun. And I remember, you know, in my first couple months, I went to a party at a house that Matt Iglesias was in at the time. And
they went to the Flop House or Casa del something? I don't remember.
Whatever it was, the Flop. I think it was the Flop House at that time. I just remember all the light bulbs were red at the time. And, you know, I ran into Phil Klein from the American Spectator, whom I had known from New York, because we were both New York conservatives. And I met Chris Hayes for the first time.
Oh, yeah. I've had this party, actually.
And
I've been to this party.
Yeah. And he was shocked to meet me, because he's like, "Oh, you wrote for the American Conservative. I thought you were 75 years old." Oh, no, it turns out I am 25 like everyone else in the city. And I have lifelong friendships from there. But on the other hand, and in general, I found it very friendly and cozy. But that also made me a little nauseous of it after a time and worried about how, you know, how everyone can get affected by the inside the Beltway thinking, and also there are, like anywhere, just weird jealousies and personal histories that start building up over time. So it felt like good to get out.
I think, this is going to be my last point. I want to stress that I think the trick to living in DC, which I haven't mastered at all, is finding the culture that's here outside of politics, even if you love it. So you can find balance. I'm going to make a shameless promotion for my friend Gio's website called Capital Bop, which basically tries to dominate the DC jazz scene. And he's shown me that there's actually like a respectable jazz scene in DC that just nobody knows about.
Yeah, I don't know about it, but...
And I think the trick in living in New York or DC is to, if you're like someone who's into politics, is to find that balance between doing what you love and getting your fill, but also relieving yourself with life outside that stuff. Because I know, you know, but then again, I mean, I think the conclusion we can make from this conversation is that the healthy thing to do is spend some time in New York and DC in your life. And
if you're one of these people like us, and I don't think you'll regret it either. And I agree with you. I remember when I was down in DC, I would have. I did take a lot of weekends to go up to New York and see my fiance and so forth. But if I was there full 7 days a week, most weeks, I discovered that there was an improv comedy community that was
I've heard
thriving.
About that, actually.
Yeah, that was actually thriving in DC. So there are other things to do in DC, but they do feel almost illicit. And I also don't want to portray DC as only being about politics. There it is only about politics, but then there's this whole like giant half of DC that's still like, black DC. That's like living there, creating culture, and living lives that are good and dignified, but that don't get talked about.
Right.
So
because we're too busy talking about the deficit.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, there's stuff going on at Howard. There's stuff going on for people to see.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. So there's another Daniel Strauss who went to the University of Michigan and lives in Chicago and is from D.C.
Wow.
And I friended him on Facebook, and I really don't know why. I go into these really social modes every once in a while. And, he's now in Second City, which is this sort of basically farm for Saturday Night Live. And there was a show up in Maryland for free because it's college. No one can afford to go to a Second City show and pay $30 a ticket. And me and a friend went, and it was great. And this is one of those illicit things you would not really expect or know about DC. We rented a zip car and just went up, and that was, it was awesome.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, find balance, especially good advice in the dawning age of iron aristocracy that we were speculating about.
When find cheap balance as the middle class splits into the lower and upper middle class.
Yeah.
And visions become a myth. Okay.
This has been fun. This has been fun, Daniel. I'm glad that you got your first one in.
Thanks. Yeah, this is my maiden voyage.
And hopefully we'll do it again sometime soon.
Yeah, we also need to meet next time we're in the same area code. We've always talked about actual face-to-face stuff, so hopefully we can do that.
All right.
But great talking with you, and hopefully we can do it again.
Yeah, we'll do it soon. Take care.